Boy, that's gonna get added to the recording right there. Hey folks, welcome to another episode of the Security Table. I'm Chris Romeo, joined by Izar Tarandash and Matt Coles. We are the people of the Security Table. I don't know what to call us. I'm kind of working on nicknames and things like that. And that one was terrible, but it was off the cuff. So we got an issue today that we want to talk about. So I did a podcast interview on the AppSec podcast talking about software supply chain. And there was another LinkedIn post that made reference to it. And it pointed to an issue about how security people love dumping on open source as a challenging thing or as something that's the villains or...
No. Wait. Use the whole thing.
Okay. Security people
dumping on open source as a hive of scum and villainy.
As a hive of scum and villainy. I mean, the only problem is that, like, it's the open source that's being attributed to the hive of scum and villainy. Because I thought if we're saying security people are a hive of scum and villainy, then I can pick like a Batman villain that I can be, and I can have a whole persona, and it's whole thing. But
has anybody checked the calendar if it's Talk Like a Pirate Day?
It's Groundhog Day. It's Groundhog Day.
Today's Groundhog Day when we're recording this episode. So, but let's talk about the issue. What was put into the LinkedIn message isn't really the important part here. The important part is, how do security people perceive open source? That's where I want to start our discussion today. So, Matt, you're nodding your head, which means I get to call on you first.
Sure, why not? What else is new? So, what do security people think of open source?
Yeah. What do security people think about it?
As a security person, I think of open source as a part of doing business today. Right? Many systems are built from it, and a realization, or rather a lost realization or missing realization, that consumption of open source does not remove any obligation for its use or inheritance, right? So obviously when you build something, I want to be careful. When you build something with open source, you're inheriting what comes with it. Mm-hmm. So you get both the good and the bad. We've talked about this in other episodes about responsibility. This goes back to Bob Lord and his statement around civic responsibility for when you find vulnerabilities, right? Same thing. When you use an open source component, you inherit both the functionality that you want as well as the issues that come along with it, whether they're security, functional, or otherwise. If you're building open source, and just for listeners' benefit, right? Izar and I, of course, both are involved with an open source project, and we've worked with open source developers on other things, and I think there's sometimes a misunderstanding or lack of understanding around security.
Just in case you're listening on audio, Izar just changed his video feed to be like an extreme close-up of his eye.
I didn't touch a thing. I'm sorry.
So Matt, please continue.
Where was I? That's gonna be hard to continue from. So if you're building open source, I think sometimes security gets lost in the shuffle because a lot of open source is written by one person or a couple of people, and they're just sort of doing it on the side. It's not a professional job for most people, and so their primary goal is to get something out that works, that people might find of interest, right? Either they're trying to build a resume, or they're, they have something that they just want to share with the community. And sometimes, that means corners are cut. I don't think I have heard in my travels with other security professionals of referring to open source as being a pit of danger, right? I think that like I said, I think that there's an understanding, at least now, that there's an inheritance, a concern of inheritance, and that there's stuff to be handled. And the world is waking up to that. But I don't think I question that statement.
Yeah, and since I was one of the people that was attributed to, it's open source is the backbone of everything, every product that exists today. Show me a product that doesn't consist primarily of open source. I would love to find one, and I'm sure there are some out there, but I'd love examples of it because everything runs on top of open source. And so by no means do I consider open source to be this pit of despair or any other analogies.
Hive of scum and villainy.
Hive of scum and villainy. I don't consider it to be that at all. Like it is, for one thing, it's a reality. It is how software and products and applications are built today. There is no. Could you imagine if somebody came in as a leader, a new CTO to a startup? There's a sigh in the play there, but a new CTO comes into a startup and says, "Okay, we're not going to use open source, so we need to rip all of our open source." Like it wouldn't even be possible. Like
no.
It'd be impossible to do that.
Look. It would be possible. It would be possible. It just would be very painful
and expensive because you'd have to rewrite all of that. Like, oh, we're going to write our own framework for our JavaScript front end apps so that we can. It's just not even.
I'm sorry. You would have to start by writing your own compiler. Have to start by writing your own kernel.
Well,
your own open source. You did?
Yep.
Go ahead. Keep going. Just repeat what you said.
That can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Can you hear me now? Yeah. So you would have to write your own compiler, your own kernel, your own everything.
Right? Oh, I didn't even get there. You went, you're right. Your own operating, kernel.
To paraphrase Danny Rojas, open source is life, right?
That's true.
And I can't even grasp the question itself. How? And I have heard that episode. How could it have been perceived that both of you were talking about open source in the view of security professionals as a hive of scum and villainy? I mean, the security industry would not be what it is today if it wasn't for open source. And I don't think I'm exaggerating.
Well, okay, so can we just roll back for just a sec? We didn't define open source. I think we've talked about it in the past. So just a quick sidetrack, right? Open source versus free software, right? Versus commercial or closed packages. So
who let someone in the room? Yeah.
Microsoft Windows, for example, is closed source, right? Is a closed source component. And people have successfully built applications on top of with Microsoft as an operating system and Microsoft tools, which are closed source, right, for decades, right? Before that, it was Unix, which was not open source. And now, could you do that again? Yes. Yes, you could. Would it be cheap? No. Would it be hard? Yes. Would it be efficient? No. Probably not. And you'd have to basically reinvent the wheel for almost everything that the platform didn't provide. Open source versus free software, right? There may be closed source that is still available, that is not, commercial. Those exist as well. But most of them, I think by and large, we're talking about things for which the source code is available and that people can either choose to use as is or modify freely. Mm-hmm. Right? That's what we're talking about here.
Yeah.
And you're right. The world runs on it, whether we like it or not. And we deal with it, and security relies on it. Most of our tools are open source, or at least based on open source. All of our technologies that we comment, Kubernetes or Spring or Java is for the most part open source. Python, etc. Right? So
the fact that open source normally means you have access to the source code, it should mean that it makes AppSec easier. Unfortunately, that isn't how it's played out in how the AppSec industry, and we could say the those that are building software, it isn't how it's been. It hasn't resulted in moving the security needle forward because you have access to the code. But technically, it should make things easier. Because you could actually look at the code if you want to.
You could
it's
if
the
you want
eyeballs
to.
argument. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's the eyeballs argument. But the thing is, I think that it can be argued that in those cases where it's necessary, where it's actually important, perhaps we don't get the direct number of eyeballs in there. But to go back to an example that we have used in past episodes, OpenSSL, they have this huge security apparatus framework scaffold together with its open source effort, right, in parallel and working closely with. And that would not have been possible if it was closed source.
Well, we would not have been transparent. We would not have known. Microsoft, go back to that example. They have a whole security apparatus around closed source components, right?
They do, and I am by no means saying that Microsoft is not doing enough, or everybody has their problems and all that good stuff. Bad things in all best families. But I still think that some processes in some places are lacking vis-a-vis the same processes in more public places. I think that what's the saying? Sun is the best cleaning agent. So when things are exposed, you actually see everything for what it is and all the ugliness and all the beauty.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
I think the biggest problem, number of bugs.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. No, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just saying, I think that it touches upon something I mentioned, at the very beginning, right around when you use open source components, when you use any component, you inherit what comes with it.
Yep.
And the problem with it moving the needle or not moving the needle forward is there's this notion that by selecting open source, I'm not going to inherit any problems. So the head in the sand problem, right? I'm not throwing this back at developers because developers aren't necessarily in the best position to be able to know what they're getting. Although ideally they do, because engineering 101 should be validate the components before you start to integrate them, right? This whole build versus buy decision, acquisition, and integration should follow some process that helps with making informed risk decisions. But it just starts with one, but now as you start to include dozens of components, hundreds of components potentially, and the tools that you use bring in other components, and those bring in other components. You get these transitive dependencies. Mm-hmm. The amount of complexity goes up. And the fact that there's so much code that other people wrote that you can use, applications are tending to get more complex. And so it's sort of like, there was an old episode of 2.5 Men, if anybody used to watch that show back in the day. And one of the episodes they were talking about, it was about financial issues, where they basically took a cup and it was a cup of water, and if you poke a hole in it, the water comes out, and if you pour water in, it will fill up and it will sort of be equilibrium and whatnot. But if you don't, and you poke a whole bunch of holes in it, right, it's going to drain out completely. And if you try to put stuff in the top, then it will just end up in the bottom and you won't have anything left to drink. Well, imagine that kind of analogy when it comes to complexity and issues of software, and you keep on adding components because you get, I want this piece and I want this piece and I want this piece and I want this piece. And now the magnitude of the security problem increases exponentially on top of it. Mm-hmm. And so while you can have eyes on it, sorry, and I my apologies for the dissertation here. Right?
No,
this is supposed to be interactive.
Listening is interacting.
The notion that, while you can have eyes on the thing, while you can have eyes on the code, if you're inheriting it and you get all of the things come with it, but you're only using a portion of it, and then you add other things on top of that, and you continually add things on top of that, you suddenly lose sight, and now it becomes an iceberg, right? Where you have the tip of the iceberg and everything below it.
Because of the depth of how many pieces are there. So I want to challenge something that you said pretty early in that explanation, and that is, I don't think people do build versus buy anymore. I don't think that's the modern flow for how developers create software. It's more of the question is there a component that I can import that will provide the functionality that I need. I don't think there's really ever a question about should I build my own version of this component. That's my perception of the world of engineering.
I think that it's even worse. I've seen cases where what you need doesn't exist, so people are ready to move the design towards something that already exists, just so that they don't have to build that whole thing from scratch. So close enough is good enough. But now I want to pull a Chris. Okay, I want to put a thought experiment on the table. As experienced security people, what would it look like if security people would look at open source as a hive of scum and villainy? How would that translate? Because we already agreed that we don't. How would it look if it did? What would be the argument here?
I have a feeling. Are we talking about like Pirates of the Caribbean? We're talking about Tortuga.
That is the picture in my mind. Yes, I will not deny that. In my mind, I'm talking like a pirate, har me mateys, for like half an hour. But
pillage and burning and all that.
Yeah. Less of that, more of the rum and dancing. But
I guess it would be demonizing developers. Right, saying like open source, but I'm in your thought experiment here.
But think from a security point of view, why?
You want to know what the motivation? How would we do it?
Yeah,
how or why?
What would it look like? Okay, so ChatGPT, you are now a security expert that considers open source to be a hive of scum and villainy. Describe to me what's in your mind.
Yeah. So this is a whole lot easier discussion. Let's assume for a moment that developers of open source software are corrupt, that they don't consider security at all, and they intend to deceive. Here's my code, take it. Never mind.
But if that was the model, if that was the model, how long would something like that actually exist and expand? I mean, we are talking. Oh, now I get it. I think that they may have been talking about the bit in the podcast where you guys were discussing that you couldn't trust package managers. Mm-hmm. Would that be it?
Are we talking about dependency injection now?
I think that in a way that's where the things.
Okay.
I'm starting to see a picture here.
Okay. Well,
please enlighten us because I'm lost.
Well, Johnny Depp is in it.
Okay.
There's a bit of parrots all around.
And maybe some Keith Richards too.
Oh, God. No.
Are you kidding me?
You're muted.
Izar, we can't hear you.
No, can't hear you.
Nope, nothing.
Well, you'll have to wait till next week's episode to hear Izar's explanation for this entire situation.
He was just about to explain it, and he went.
That's right. Dun, 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 cliffhanger. That's how we roll here.
Reboot. Try to reboot. Kick it.
Why is Cliff?
There you are.
Why is Cliff and why is he hanging?
Anyway, there you are.
But
you're back.
So where did you guys lose me?
Right as you were about to explain everything.
You were about to explain this momentous explanation you figured out the whole thing.
Yeah, Johnny Depp is in it, and then you said no to Keith Richards, and then you went silent.
So Keith Richards is listening to us and probably sabotaged my setup here. But I remember it had the number 42 in it somewhere. But no, what I was thinking was, okay, so in the podcasts in question here, I think that Chris and his guest, I'm sorry, I forgot the name. I think that there was some thingy about. Is it still recording? Because it tells me that it uploaded. Anyway, so they were talking about how you couldn't trust package managers, right? And then Matt threw in dependency injection. And I started thinking that, you know what, perhaps that's what triggered the security people saying that the developers are bad, because clearly who would do something like this, right? But then Matt mentioned that if that was the case, then No. In your in the thought experiment, you said that a bad developer could create a malicious package, and that's what triggered the whole thing for me. So then my question, when you guys couldn't hear me, was, okay, let's say that would happen. For how long would that package be out there without somebody figuring it out and killing or removing or whatever? So it's not like that would expand to the whole community of open source. So while
It'd be
yes,
massive collusion. It'd be massive collusion, and we know that malicious packages stay up for, on PyPy, for instance, they stay up for 30 days. I'm pulling that number out of the air. Just a few discussions, news articles. They don't get discovered immediately, and then they stay up for some period of time, right?
So for the whole hive of villainy thing to exist, there should be some cabal that controls open source and makes sure that everything that's bad is happening and nobody knows about it.
That's right.
Mm-hmm. Like an Illuminati for the open source.
Being accused
of
GitHub,
the dark GitHub.
Right? A GitHub Minati, not to use something closer to me here. But been there, done that, and no, it's not how things work. So, yeah, don't. No, how?
And this is let me throw another kind of idea at you guys and get your take on this. So I think one of the challenges that we have in addressing the software supply chain is we tend to lump every package on Earth together into this problem. And I was doing a little bit of research yesterday for an article that I wrote in Reasonable AppSec, the newsletter. And I found that there's 1.3 million packages in NPM, the Node Package Manager. How many of those packages actually matter? It can't be 1.3 million. So part of our challenge here is we're addressing every piece of open source software in the same way on Earth. And so one of the things I started in my own little thought experiment of how would I solve the software supply chain if I had all the power in the world, why not have the package managers have some criteria, or have a package manager that only serves up things that meet a certain criteria?
Because dependencies.
But trust me, I guess dependencies do start to break that down. But that brings the question then: would it require? And I'm throwing this to you guys. Would it require the way open source is built to rely? Would we have to change the philosophy of open source to be less dependent on dependencies and more focused, or is that ship already sailed?
It's recursion, right? You can't write something that things will be highly dependent of and say you shouldn't be dependent of everything, or you should give such importance to the things that you depend on that the whole inheritance problem that Matt alludes to would go away. So I don't know. Just spitting it out here. I think that, if somebody wakes up in the morning and says, I'm going to write a package that does ABC and I'm going to make it available to the whole world, if we just start lumping process on top of it, that person will have less of an incentive to wake up in the morning and go write package ABC. And we are going to end up losing.
Yeah, I think first off, I think we're conflating where you not misusing, double using inheritance. I was talking about inheritance meaning you own it, it now becomes part of you into your scope. You're pulling it in, so it's now in your scope, as opposed to inheritance like a hierarchy, which is where transitive dependencies come in, right?
No, but one implies the other.
No, because I'm using the word differently. In two different ways, right? So I'm using inheritance to mean it becomes within your scope versus one relies on the other, right?
If it came into your scope, it's because you rely on it.
But
it's more of a responsibility thing.
Yeah,
I think from the way Matt's describing, he's basically saying that if I take a package and include it in my application, I am accepting responsibility for the security of that package that I brought. And I'll give you an example of one of the brilliant people at Cisco years and years ago, when open source was first becoming a thing. The saying that the tagline is that they distributed around and the whole company got behind is It may not be your software, but it is your problem.
Yeah. Yep.
And that was to make that argument for people to say, if you're going to include a package, no customer is ever going to listen to you say, well, that vulnerability, that was in the component that we use. That's not really us.
Go talk to Joe.
This was a long time ago. But that was part of the challenge. I'm going back. I mean, I'm dating myself here, but this is 15 years ago, right? People were saying that. People were saying, well, it's not, the vulnerability is not in what we wrote. It's in the components. So it's the components problem. Just tell the customer that. And everybody was like, we were like, as security teams, like, no, we can't tell customers that it's not our product.
Right. So the other part of inheritance that you talked about, the hierarchy of this component relies on this component to function or to do whatever. That use of inheritance, I think, that goes back to the dependency and the question that Chris raised. I want to throw out something that I want to mention something that has come and gone, and it may be important for this discussion. Do you remember reputation as a concept when it comes to open source? There was something that was being pushed a while. I know a while back, a couple of years ago, certainly maybe 5 years ago, it started, where there was a notion of reputation as a property of components. Mm-hmm. And it was sort of a collection of a correlation of attributes around things like how recently was it last updated, how many stars does the repo have, and does it have any defects that cause it to have a negative reputation?
Isn't that the OpenSSF scorecard?
It might be. Is that what that is now? I don't think
it's the same thing. I remember, Matt, what you're talking about. There was
how long ago are we talking about?
I'm thinking back in like 2014, 2015.
No. The scorecard is pretty new, but the things that you're listing, I think that they are directly there.
Yeah, I mean, I recall this from way back when. There used to be a sort of it wasn't a system, but it's
like an algorithm.
There was some sort of metric that would get generated, and you could look it up. And I forget, there was a website or something.
And I think it fell apart. It fell apart though because the reason OpenSSF went the way they did with the scorecard, like the scorecard doesn't exist for every component. That's how I understand it. It's like the top components, because they're like, hey, these are the things that have the most risk because they're used the most across the entire. In all the industries that rely upon it versus but the reputation, I remember it kind of didn't work because it was a lot of work and people just didn't do it, and they didn't have any incentive to do it either. There was no reason why I would do it as an open source package.
And it was a trailing indicator, because as the reputation changed, the reputation score would change, but you would have to like continually watch its progress, and it would trail the actual behavior of the project. It also was really probably open to collusion, right? Because if the only people who had incentive for rating reputation were people who would rate it unnaturally high, then people who consumed that reputation score would then get an unrealistic value. And
it was a self metric though. There was no repository of reputation scores that have been independently compiled.
Oh no, I think that this. I recall there was tooling around it. There was tooling around this, like it was not Black Duck, but one of the other SCA tools at the time reported reputation scores.
Oh, okay.
Maybe it was from their own repository. I don't know, but but
can you imagine the industry if that had taken off?
Yeah, but can you imagine that would potentially help solve the problem of avoiding the case of components that are whatever, like hive of villainy or whatever. You would have an ability to have the community crowdsource which components are better for their purpose, not just by having eyes on the code, but also from their actual usage.
Look, I don't know why it didn't work, but off the top of my head, I can only imagine the mess it would have been with people saying, oh, I want to write this thing and I wrote this thing and I want to publish it, but I can't get the right reputation, so I don't get visibility. Okay, let's split everybody. These guys are going to get the reputation. These guys are not. And you publish whatever you want. And you see what I'm going with this?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's totally open to who's in the circle and who's not, right?
Do we need more of that?
As somebody who didn't have a lot of friends in high school, I know exactly.
My circle was a square.
At least you had a square. You had 4 points. That's more.
Where's from? You are so far from the line you can't even see the line. Oh, that's Johnny. No, that's Tribbiani. Joey. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So far from the line, you can't even see the line.
I would have been better off living in Flat World.
Which I haven't read this year yet. I have to go back there. Yeah.
All right. Well, how do we conclude this? How do we? I don't know. What's our
Myth
takeaway?
Busted.
Myth busted.
Yeah. Harmy mateys. There is no scum and villainy happening in here.
Nope.
To quote Johnny Depp, slap. I don't think I deserve that.
That's a good way to end it. It's a good way to wrap up this conversation. I'm sure this isn't the last time we'll discuss the software supply chain on the security table. So the issue will come back up again, probably within a month or two. So, folks, thanks for listening to this episode. Hope you enjoyed it. Please, I was going to say like us on Facebook, but we don't have a Facebook presence.
Please don't.
Oh my God.
If we do, the reputation is poor.
Yeah, we're on the YouTubes. We're on
LinkedIn.
Do,
it's not us.
It wasn't us. Yeah, we're on LinkedIn. We're on YouTube, and wherever you find podcasts in audio form. Thanks for listening, folks.